Hi everyone, welcome to osquery office hours on this glorious March 30th day here in Boston. It's getting kind of warm, so climate change or spring, either way, but welcome everyone.
Hello everyone.
Hi.
We usually start off with any announcements or highlights. Probably the big announcement is that since the last meeting, I think we actually cut 4.7.0. We'll talk about that later in the agenda, but yay. I guess also there was an openssl vulnerability, and we'll loop back to that. I don't know if anyone else has any announcements. Okay. Probably next up would be questions or discussion from random community members. So the intent here is to let anyone who's dropped into the meeting ask questions they have. One thing I did pre-stage was that Dan here had a question about TLS logging. So Dan, if you'd like to ask, now's a great time.
Yeah, I would love to ask. I'll try to make it not super long, but I'll give a quick background. We started last year rolling out osquery and Fleet. We have about 4,000 hosts now, mostly laptops. So we did our corporate environment. A few weeks ago, we had users start to complain. Their ISPs were telling them they were going over their bandwidth limits, and we're doing next to nothing with osquery at the moment. We sort of went faster on the build out than our GIS team had the bandwidth to catch up and build queries and packs and everything. So we were scratching our heads, what's going on? We reinstalled the client a few times. That seemed to help temporarily on Macs better than on Windows. And then everything sort of come to a head over the last couple of weeks where we're seeing coming into our Fleet, we see like a couple terabytes a day of data. And we're really running things like select star from osquery once an hour. That's basically all we're running. So very, very, very simple stuff. And so we started doing some packet captures and things, and we noticed, and this is what led to me opening the osquery Git issue was, well, most of the clients we were seeing were just completely duplicate packets, retransmits constantly. For every packet was going 5 to 7 times duplicate. But yet connectivity was fine. I mean, I run the client and debug. I can see everything connecting, no problems. And so then we, over the last several week and a half or so, we've just been diving in, and it turns out what seems to be what I think is sort of the root issue, or at least a big part of it, is the clients that are experiencing this are not able to actually send logs to Fleet. They can check in to config, they can check in for distributed queries. You can run distributed queries against them, but every time they try to hit the API v1 osquery log endpoint, which is what we've got configured for the logger, they just get a 400. I think it's coming from nginx and not Fleet behind nginx based on some of what I was just looking at the other day. But it's probably half, I would say, at this point of our clients. Or I don't have the numbers, but looking at 400s versus 200s to the endpoint, it's about half and half. And these clients basically never log; they just can't ever log. So it's just trying over and over and over again, which still maybe doesn't explain the bandwidth usage because we don't try that often. We actually have the logger TLS period is now 300 seconds because we wanted to try to bring down the connections in our firewalls. And that's the big thing is our corporate firewalls are getting overloaded now with connections and with data. So I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss at this point. We're going to try to figure out why we're not getting proper logging on nginx, at least that we can tell. We're not seeing anything. I see that the 400s are logged, but there's no errors, right? And it should be, especially if it's coming from nginx, there should, I would think, be an error in the error log. So for some reason, we're not seeing that. So we're trying to fix that. But anything else, if anyone has any suggestions on what might be going on, I would love to hear them.
Well, one thing that I've seen is that when you have connectivity issues, Fleet buffers up quite a number of status logs that are full of the errors about the connectivity issues, and those keep being built up and are then retransmitted on every single attempt to resend logs. So then you have increasing sizes of logs which which might be desirable in some scenarios. And I mean, obviously this doesn't solve the root of your problem, but maybe it would be worth configuring the flags in osquery that change the number of logs that can be buffered, so that it just drops older logs and you don't end up with massive requests.
Yep, we could look at that. I know the settings for that.
So I would take a look at that. The other thing is, if you find that Fleet's returning 400s, like, let us know so we can look into that. Is it literally like HTTP 400, or is it like for something else?
It's a 400. Yeah, it's a 400. And the reason I think the evidence I have that it's not Fleet at this point is I enabled Fleet debug on the Fleet servers, and then I watched for an IP coming through the logs, and every time there would be a request to the read endpoint, like whatever it is, distributed read to do its check-in and stuff, I would see 4 log entries in var log messages on Fleet, right? Because you see it coming in. But every time I would get a 400 from that same IP through nginx, there would be nothing logged at Fleet. So I would hope that Fleet would be logging it if there was an issue. If it's not, then okay, maybe. But that's just a data point that seems to indicate that it would be nginx and not Fleet.
And when you do these things, are you able to see, or when these things happen, are you able to see from like the TLS dump logs in osquery what osquery is attempting to send?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of, I have to recall everything that we did. But yes, I mean, I've done it, and you and I talked about this. I haven't gone back to the client side yet, but when I've been debugging, the only command I had that worked was the ephemeral one, and you had mentioned, hey, probably not the best to use that. It skips the DB and all that. I hadn't gone back to find a debug, to figure out a debug command that actually worked using a side database, temporary database. But I have seen the debug output, and it's just normal looking stuff, right? It's register, and of course it registers each time because they're using the ephemeral flag, so it's going to register itself, and then it's like, hey, do I check in? Here's all the queries, here's all the packs, and then it sits there every 5 minutes, and because that's what we have configured for the config check-in, and it'll check in for distributed queries. Sorry, the config check-in is every hour, but distributed is every 300 seconds. So it'll check for distributed query, nothing. I can run distributed queries against it, fine. When it does hit a pack, it executes the pack, and I assume sends it back to Fleet. I don't see any errors or anything like that. So it seems to be working fine that way. And maybe that's a indication that it's something in RocksDB, because I mean we did an uninstall reinstall this morning of a Windows client, and it started up again and working for about a few minutes, 20-30 minutes, and now it's actually it sent 7.5 gig of data over the last 6 hours.
I feel like what you really need to get is the nginx logs, right? Because what you're describing is that osquery is sending data, and you think it's trying to send it to the log endpoint, which sounds believable. And for some reason, it's not getting through.
Yep.
And then there's a general theory that because it's not getting through, osquery is basically probably logging an error, which is going to increase the amount of buffered data, and then it was going to retry everything, right? So you have a little bit of a cascading thundering herd problem, but without understanding why it's not getting through, it's very hard to say what to do, right? As I think Zach mentioned, you can configure osquery to drop data, right? And then you'll have a little bit less of a cascading problem. Doesn't solve what your problem is, but maybe it doesn't get worse.
Yeah.
But then you really have to understand, where is that 400 coming from?
Yep.
And osquery's TLS dump option is one way of seeing it, maybe because you can see like osquery might say, here's a pile of stupid information about network connectivity, failed to transfer because of X, whatever. And you might see a response back that maybe is very clear, right? Like maybe you can recognize an nginx generated error, or maybe not.
Yeah.
Or I'm sure nginx has logging facilities, so like log every connection and see why it dropped.
Yeah, no, that's what we're doing. For some reason, like I said, I don't know why we're not getting the nginx logs, the error logs. So I've got my team working on that, and then you have to if you want to do debug, I know you can do a debug connection and watch the connection come through, but we got to recompile a binary of nginx for that. It doesn't come like enabled. So we're looking at that. That is literally the next step we're doing.
So
Okay.
I just took a quick look, and we don't explicitly return 400 errors anywhere in Fleet. So it's possible one of our dependencies does, but it does lend credibility to the notion that the errors might be coming from nginx.
Okay, cool. That sounds great. Thanks to everyone for the feedback. I just had 2 quick follow-ups. We do see a lot of invalid node keys and missing node keys, which I haven't really looked at because it doesn't seem, I don't know if it's related. I was wondering, this is on a VPN currently. We don't have an external path set up yet because we haven't gotten there yet, but we're going to do, I can't remember the article, but it's the one where we take the admin endpoints and we only allow them from, VPN, and then the APIs will open up, and again, we'll be using nginx to do this. But any issues with like if an client IPs change, does that cause missing? Nothing like that, because I mean we're on a VPN, so people might be getting different IPs when they come in. Not a big deal there. Okay, cool. I wanted to follow up on that one. I think I kind of had one other thing, but I don't remember it right now. So
someone wrote something here saying, "Does the logger plugin need to be improved to not exhibit this behavior? Better documentation." I don't know if that was from you or from someone else.
it wasn't for me.
Okay.
There is not really a lot in the logger plugin documentation. That's true, but
I added those parentheticals. I thought maybe there was something we could do, even if the problem isn't on our end. It probably is a little bit on the agent side. If it's doing this, it probably shouldn't.
I'm not sure, because if the agent is logging like got 400, like I don't know, if you tell the agent dump all your logs to this remote server, and then the remote server says like, what kind of like, where should we go? Like the default tuning, I think, on all of this is around saving data as much as possible to resend it, which we know people want. So I don't. I mean, maybe Dan's going to come back and be like, "Oh yes, okay, I got more information." But like right now, I'm not hearing any takeaways.
Well, the debug was interesting because I didn't see any issues in the debug, even from clients. And from my client myself, which I'm not having this problem, I had other people run it and no issues. Everything looked fine. But again, I was using the ephemeral plugin, so maybe it's something with the database. That's the only thing. Because what does ephemeral do, right? Other than skip the database, I'm not sure what else that's doing for me, but that works fine.
I mean, another thing that comes up for me is maybe like, is it possible that nginx throws 400s if request sizes are too big?
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Or data it doesn't like. So if you're seeing invalid UTF-8 data, which we see sometimes in osquery.
Oh yeah,
or
that's a good point.
nginx might be having some kind of rate limiting. nginx might say like, whoa, too many connections from that IP address, especially if you're running stuff through a NAT. Request size, like we could guess, right? But this is all it's all guesses about.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we're definitely looking at that. I did see a lot of stuff with headers, and so we were going to look at that. I have a small number of EOF errors in fleet logs, like invalid JSON, something like that. But it's like 60, not like 10,000, which is what it should. So I don't think that's probably an issue, but I know Noah was looking at those. But anyway, I don't want to, we spent 14 minutes on my issue or whatever, so I don't want to take too much time. We definitely have a next step, I think. So if anyone has other stuff that they want to talk about, please.
I just wanted to make one other comment. I posted an nginx config that I've used in the past in the chat.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the chat. I saw that come up. I don't see the chat.
So, and I don't know if the
right corner, there's a little chat icon you can click.
Yeah, so take a look at that, see if anything differs. Maybe that'll help you. That's a config that I know is working with 3.7. So,
yeah, and this one from defensive depth is the one that we plan to do when we actually split everything out, right? Because we didn't want to have we didn't just want to open it up to the internet, right? So that's why we're still on the VPN, because we haven't gotten that far. But yeah, thank you for that. We'll be looking at these for sure.
I'd like to ask a hopefully quick question about the recent OpenSSL vulnerabilities. I understand that osquery is not directly affected because you're not using OpenSSL as a TLS server. You're not using the flags that cause the certificate validation stuff to go awry. I was just wondering if the investigation also covered any dependencies that osquery uses and the way that osquery uses them. Like if SQLite happens to do something that would be vulnerable to this, and osquery were using SQLite in a way that would be dependent upon that functionality.
So I don't know if anyone has done extensive research here. My understanding is this vulnerability is pretty limited to using TLS authentication, and there just aren't a lot of places osquery does anything like that. So like we don't really have like a subsystem that reaches out to talk to another subsystem, right? Like SQLite is very much embedded inside by C API calls, so there shouldn't be any OpenSSL play in there.
I mean, the curl table is like maybe the only thing that would also be able to exercise this code, right?
Curl table, there's the Yara table can make outbound connections, right? But like, I don't think any of these are designed for TLS-based authentication or strong assurances there. So I'm not sure. Like, is there anything on the TLS logger side?
I mean, the TLS plugins can do mutual TLS like client authentication, but it sounds like you're saying the issue is on the server side of that.
Let me go pull up the vulnerability announcement.
So yeah, there's two vulnerabilities involved here. There's one that's directly related to TLS renegotiation. That's CVE 2021-3449, I believe. And there's another one that is certificate strict checks. It's a flag that you would have to set inside of your code to turn on strict checking for purposes of the certificate.
Yeah, I had only looked for whether we were affected by that latter one. I didn't actually look at the renegotiation of TLS.
That's for a server though, right? Not for a client?
Correct. The renegotiation, the CVE says it applies only to servers.
I do not believe osquery is a server anywhere.
Yes, I heard you call out like SQLite, and SQLite doesn't have a remote server mode or anything like that either. I'm certainly not aware of anywhere that osquery like binds to a socket and listens on a server besides for the Unix domain socket that's used for the local thrift connections. And again, that's not HTTP.
Okay, and just FYI, the only reason I called out SQLite is to be an example of a dependency to try and illustrate what I was trying to ask, not because I had any specific concern around SQLite.
Oh, no criticism meant, just...
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I just want to make sure that I didn't miscommunicate by accident.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Again, like I said, there's no place that osquery binds to like a TCP socket and would then act as a TLS server. And if anyone discovers any place where that does happen, that sounds like something that's worth critical investigation.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer the question for me.
Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah.
Just taking notes in the background. Okay. Any other questions from the crowd, or shall I just continue going down our list? Okay, I'm going to keep going down the list. I guess actually one final note on the OpenSSL thing is that we did actually upgrade the dependency, primarily motivated by trying to keep current and minimize the likelihood that third-party tools complain about it. But, that'll be in the next release. Next item I think I have is the 4.7.0 release. Clyde pushed that to beta for about a week, and we actually declared it stable and pushed it wide. I don't know what anyone's seen any problems with 4.7.0.
We're running it on, we tried using it to see if there was any change in the behavior of our issues. So we're running it. It seems like it's working, other than what we've already described.
Okay, unless anyone objects, I'm gonna maybe try and go through the rest of the steps to declare 4.7.0 stable. Although some of that will be a Teddy question, but yeah. Anyone object to calling 4.7.0 stable? Trail of Bits, you guys do any testing on this one yet?
We're not doing specific testing, but I mean, we certainly would like to see it be formalized.
Zach, you got anything?
I haven't done any specific testing either. I've seen it work in a handful of instances, but unfortunately, I don't really have much infrastructure for doing that kind of testing right now.
Okay, I think it's stable then. Sounds like it's as tested as it's getting.
Sounds good to me.
Did we lose Tim? I think he was here to probably ask about some things we didn't get to yet.
Probably about ARM.
I did see a Tim drop off.
Yeah, I think he's having some issues with audio, but he was probably going to ask about ARM.
Okay. Hey, Tim's back. Tim, I hear you want to ask about ARM. Maybe you can't hear me, though.
Or I will ask about it. If there's any way for us to help.
Okay, so I'll give folks an ARM update. Okay, so the current state of the ARM64 world, generally speaking, the osquery code runs on ARM64 fine as Linux ARM64. But we are currently trying to get it integrated into CI so that we can happily call that stable. We are currently pursuing two different routes to doing this. One route, Teddy has a PR up for, and it might, I have to take another quick look at that PR. Okay, sorry, this is really muddly in my head. Okay, so to remind people, we do our CI using GitHub, and GitHub does not officially support ARM64. GitHub's general answer to this is to use self-hosted runners. Self-hosted runners have somewhat complicated security domain questions. They're not really designed for public open source work. They run kind of the PR'd code in whatever their security domain is. So this leads to two different routes. Well, this leads to at least two different possible solutions. The two solutions we're looking at right now, one of them is sort of, for various reasons, only has the ability to run code after it merges into an osquery org. So whether that means post-merging onto master, or if we maintain a, if we were doing some major ARM work, we could just create a branch in the osquery org and be like, okay, this branch, which, only the osquery contributors have permission to write to, will just run on CI. Those are the two ways. So that's like one way to do this. This approach isn't ideal since it means CI, PRs don't get tested until after they've merged, but it is relatively fast because we don't have to monkey too much with security domains. Fundamentally, once the code merges, it becomes trusted. Teddy has a PR up for that, and I think probably we can get that merged pretty soon. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that I've been looking at with some help from AWS engineers is how to run GitHub runners in a appropriate security domain so that we can run them against pull requests. That work is a little bit slower because there's a lot of security domain permission credential maneuvering that has to happen. I had a conversation with some AWS engineers this morning about some possible ways to pursue that. So when I talked to Teddy last, we were thinking maybe we do the post-merge CI as kind of a stopgap until we can get things running pre-merge. So that's kind of a 1,000-foot level overview. Do folks have any specific questions about that?
I have one. Does this mean we will be able to mark osquery as stable on ARM? Can we upload
Possibly.
packages?
Possibly. This is kind of a question for us. Do we think CI running post merge, so once something merges to master, is enough for us to declare it stable?
Can we devise a procedure where we can maybe merge those pull requests in a temporary branch, run them, and then merge in master?
I think that's just going to be painful overhead for us.
At least for the changes on CMake. Or maybe when we add new libraries. Or rather, the pull request that will most likely break ARM support.
So the simplest answer to that is that you can just create a branch in the osquery org, and it should just do that.
Oh, nice.
Like, I don't think we have to create a complicated multi-branch strategy. Like, you, Alessandro, can just create a branch.
Yeah, right.
And probably Stefano too, right? Like, is there anyone else? So that may be enough. I feel like I want to touch base with Teddy, but having something that runs post-merge feels like it might be good enough to start talking about it as stable, because we can always revert if a merge, if it turns out to fail, then I'd like to do better. I'd like to get it running pre-merge, but the security stuff, there's a lot of juggling there.
Yeah, I guess it is fine as a starting point. It is excellent.
Yeah, it sounds like a great step to me. Thanks, y'all.
Big thanks to Teddy for some, me, AWS, the people who some people in this meeting work for, who I'm not naming because I don't know if I'm allowed to, and some other people on the internet who did some of this work ahead of time. Oh yes, also notable here, AWS has donated more credit to us to run instances, so that's hanging out. That's nice. I stuck them in our sponsor thank you list as well because of it. So I don't know if anyone saw that PR go by, but yay, sponsors. That's what I got right now. Okay. Any questions about the ARM64 from those of you who were muted? Okay, sounds like not. I hope that helped. Okay. Next agenda item is maybe this packaging logic from Trail of Bits. This was, I believe, Alessandro's work to pull the packaging out of the osquery org and put it into another org.
The other repository.
That's what I mean. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we have to take a second look at it, make sure everything is in there. I know that there was a small error in the new packaging scripts. Otherwise, I think it should be almost ready. We, of course, have to link somehow, maybe with a Git module, the right packaging scripts commit to the osquery release, because they have to talk to each other.
I would be in favor of merging whatever you feel is ready to merge and iterating. I think it's okay if the CMake and packaging isn't in perfect working shape. We just cut a release. We're probably not going to need to cut a release for a month. So I think it's fine to merge it and iterate.
Yeah, better now than a week before the next release.
Yeah, and yeah, we also have the code sign repository that we have to look at. I mean, it will work even without code signing for now, but I guess we have pretty much everything in there. Seth has prepared the secrets. We have given Charville access to test the packaging and signing logic. And most of the placeholder code should be already in there. In some cases, we only have to, like on Windows, we literally only have to replace the signtool.exe code we are making right now. And we are using a self-sign certificate for testing purposes right now. So it should, for some platforms, it should be really easy.
Yeah, I think we're not going to get it perfect before we merge it. No matter what we do, there's going to be some problems. So I feel like the best thing we can do is merge and start playing with it.
Yeah. Oh, and also, Timothy has found a really nice tool named pkgdiff that I never used before, and we can maybe use that to compare the new packaging with the old packaging based on artifacts. So that was really helpful.
I think I've just manually done that by expanding packages into their appropriate files and just using diff-r on them. Anyhow, I'm in favor of moving forward, and I believe 6921 has approvals from both Teddy and me on it. So, you got quorum there.
There was a confirmation from Timothy over chat as well.
Oh, thanks so much for testing it.
So I think I left one comment in the in your docs, but in your unless PR, but I said iterating seems great. So I think forward and iterate. And anything else on packaging logic? Okay. Teddy left us some to-do items. I'll just sort of read them aloud. He can't be here, but it sounds like he maybe wanted us to just be cognizant of them. He's looking at the watchdog code, trying to simplify it a bit, and thinking about the IPC communication between the watchdog and the underlying worker threads. I don't know what I can say about that, but Teddy says he's thinking about it. So if anyone wants to say anything, I guess just say it or stick it into the notes doc and Teddy will read it. It sounds like Teddy is also experimenting with reducing binary size of the tests on Windows. Sounds like mostly trying to reduce link footprints. Actually, I have a question about binary size on tests. Stefano, I know you've done stuff on this. This is about the overall disk space on the machine, right? It's not particularly about shipping artifacts.
Yeah.
Is this is maybe a naive CMA question. I have encountered tools. There's a tool called UPX, which is designed to reduce the binary file size on things. So for a given compiled object, UPX will compress that object and leave it executable. But it would be like a post-build step. I've evaluated using that to reduce the file size of launcher images that I ship. Is that the
UPX
kind of
a packer?
It is.
Is
It
that
might give false. Sorry, it might give false positives on VirusTotal or something. Maybe.
Yeah, it might be flagged by some
Malware
software
detection.
Yeah. Although the test issue, the binary size issue in general is actually more due to how some part of osquery code is written, in the sense that the problem is that we rely in core libraries, we rely on the presence of tables because we do selects of those tables. And that means that, well, it's twofold: how code is written and how tables are currently handled and linked together with the rest of the code, which is that we create a single massive blob of tables, an amalgamation, and we are always forced to link all of them. So if a test, for instance, if a test has to query one table, it will have to link against all of them. But then you also have the core that in some cases, in some libraries of core libraries, it has to use those tables. And so it brings with it all those tables, which are huge, and makes them be several hundred megabytes, which compounded gets to several gigabytes. So yeah, the solution there, it's more, I think I would go more on fixing the core issue, which is that we should extract the logic of those tables and have that logic be called directly from the core. Also because that's cyclic dependency issue, because then you have tables who depends on those core libraries, and those core libraries depend on those tables. So yeah, and again, back in Olympics, I'm not sure how much you would save with it.
I don't know how well it would fit though, because you'd have to like build the test binaries and then compress them in like the CMake steps. So like it would be awkward, but I don't know if it would be a helpful band-aid or not.
Well, then else, it's also the question of how much time it takes.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, I'm not saying fixing the root cause it's actually easy. It is something. In fact, I want to talk with Teddy and maybe compare notes, because like a couple of months ago I indeed did some tests, and I was going to do some of those changes, and I was able to reduce, like, I think it was at least 5 times, if not more, the size of the tests. So the build normally, I think it's like 10 gigabytes. It went down to maybe 2 or 3, or yeah. And again, it's mainly because of that. Also, another thing, that amalgamation library, we link it with a whole archive, which means that we force that all symbols are kept by the linker, even if they are not referenced. So normally what happens is that if you link a library and you only use a single function and all the rest of the functions you do not use, the linker should be able to drop everything else. And the problem is that it cannot do that in this case because, well, it's the other reason I don't want to talk all day about this. But yeah, since we have this whole archive on these amalgamation libraries, you are forced to keep them all together and carry them around. So yeah, it's an exercise of splitting code, basically. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Next.
Is this currently impacting testing in any way? On the CI?
What was the question? Sorry.
Is this actually impacting the testing on the CI right now?
Well, so not right now. Back then, on Azure, there was an instance where we didn't have enough space and the build would fail. I mean, if we wait, osquery will have things added and then it will increase again. But also reducing the size definitely improves the build performance, because just not having to write on disk so much, especially on Windows, where the file system is a tad slower.
Yes, I was just trying to scope the priority, not whether it was a good way.
Yeah. No, this is a nice. I mean, this is a nice to have. I would say.
Okay. Anything else on Teddy's to-do list? Okay. Sometimes we talk about old PRs.
So, sorry, one last thing. Were
No,
you
go
able
on.
to test the Big Sur naming issue post 4.7 release?
Haven't looked at it yet. I'm sorry.
No worries. Ping me if you find something or anything pops up from
Okay.
there.
Feel free to like poke that ticket or something, and then it'll land in my email, and I'll remember.
Cool. No worries.
Sometimes we look at PRs. So if anyone has anything else prior to PRs, Teddy's working on a simple log rotate thing. It looks like he'd love some feedback on the functionality. Might be a good one for Zach or one of the Trailbits people to take a look at. Don't know. I looked at it. Looked like code.
Which one? Which one? Sorry.
PR 7015. I don't know if anyone else has a pull request they want to mention here.
Oh, actually, I have one. It's a really old pull request that I just remember because it's in the list you provided. The question doesn't really need an answer right now, but maybe a couple of comments in an issue or on the pull request. And it's about determining if it makes sense to attempt to capture DNS request based on hooking the libc. And the usual problems here are the ones for BPF. So we are hooking into a specific library. And if you happen to do the DNS request in another way, like connecting directly to a server or using a different library, then you will not trigger this event. So it will work for like all the binaries you have in the system, but if you happen to like build something in Go, for example, a static binary, you will not see its own DNS request. So it could be used as some kind of indicator that you know it's not 100% correct, or maybe what maybe worries me is that people may think that's something that is always correct, and if the request does not appear in there, then they feel safe.
So you're saying this is, I think, in relation to PR 6254.
Yeah.
And you're saying that implementing DNS hooks in BPF cannot capture all DNS lookup requests. It would primarily capture DNS lookup requests coming out of the system libraries.
Yeah.
Which may be valuable, but may also create a false sense of security since malware might not use those libraries.
Yeah, that is true. There is also an additional detail here. We can make it work with containers, but as they will use a different libc library, we will have to detect the container and install the hook in there once it is started up. So there's an additional step to consider.
I'm pondering sort of, I feel like there's a lot of places where osquery and security stuff in general kind of can get a best effort, but suitably subtle malware is going to be able to evade it. And I'm trying to think about, like, is it better to have this or not have this? I think it's kind of neat to have, but I don't know.
Yeah, I will create maybe an issue and look at the in the channel so people can say something about it.
I don't think it's worth, if we did this, I don't think it's worth doing the container form of it, at least not initially. It seems like a better expansion route. My gut sense is it's interesting to do even if imperfect. You know, we ship various packs. Those packs are pretty out of date. So I don't know, it seems better to have some kinds of interesting things, even if they're not all encompassing.
Well, and can we clarify in the description of this table, exactly where we're getting the data from and what the potential deficiencies are?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, to me, we do lots of things in osquery that are, potentially tamperable with, but that hasn't reduced, I think, the value to users from having access to that data.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are other ways to do DNS request detection, but the less intrusive way is this one. The other methods include like using PCAP to sniff network traffic, which would be bad. Or there are other ways to use PPF, like with XDP, but you want to be able to correlate this with a process event, which is easier with the method used in the current PreQuest, which may not work anymore. I don't remember. So if it doesn't work, then don't be surprised. Oh, and yeah, we recently fixed some things in the PPF libraries, so now we can easily trace user mode programs and libraries. So another thing that could be nice, if it is interesting, is to alert and maybe even show the comments when someone uses Bash in an interactive manner.
Any other PRs people want to bring up?
I talk again. We have a PreQuest 7006 about seccomp. That looked really useful. We're going to have to do either some work on the toolchain or change how the definitions are used in there. I'm not sure if Stefano has already covered this in the PreQuest.
I think no. So they have already done the fix, which is basically adding the missing defines directly in code. Then there is additional, there is something I have to do toolchain wise, but so there are two things. They are not connecting. It's just something that they realized while looking at this issue, let's say. And so the toolchain issue is separate. It should not be important for this PR. This PR right now, I think, only needs a review. They have done the needed fix, and it builds fine. So, yep.
Okay, is that a review you can do?
I can help. Yeah, I have to. Honestly, I have to find a little time, but yeah.
I mean, you and Alessandro sound like you think this is pretty cool, so I don't know.
I'll help out.
Teddy's already looking at it, I think.
Teddy has... looks like most of Teddy's comments have been addressed. That was 10 days ago. Okay, well, you said Alessandro. You take a look, so I don't know. Sounds like we're all playing handoff. I guess it's a pretty big PR. Seems pretty cool, but, might want a couple of people to go over it. Sounds like you're all going over it. Other PRs people want to bring up? Can mention that I discovered my coworker Jason discovered that osquery's reporting for the amount of RAM in a Windows box is wrong. There's a PR up to fix that, so that was exciting. PR 7028, if anyone's really curious about it. And I don't know, I've got some big PRs that I need to rewrite, and it's probably where I am.
Was it reporting more or less than what was available?
So for Windows, we use a WMI call to get a bunch of hardware information, which reports the RAM available to Windows, which is after the BIOS grabs some of it. So it is slightly less. It's about half a gigabyte less.
That's weird to look at.
It's documented in the WMI docs too. So the correct way to do it for Windows is to grab the capacity on every RAM module and sum them.
That's low level.
Well, welcome to Windows.
Yeah.
So anyhow, that's up as PR 7028 if you're curious about it. But it's mostly me fighting with C++. That's kind of all I got. And anyone want to say anything? Otherwise, we're kind of about at time too. Fritz, you got anything? You haven't been to one of these in ages.
No, I was just along for the ride. I don't have anything to contribute this week.
I saw Fritz just posted a beast of a SQL query in macOS channel.
Yeah. I'm gonna put that back in. I realized that I had a spelling error in it, or a syntax error.
Okay.
It was Alistair asking about getting App Store information, like apps that had installed through the Mac OS App Store. So it's a bunch of wacky plist reconstruction. I guess if we want to talk about one thing, which is sort of tangential to that, but related, is we at Collide are using a plist table that preserves array hierarchies, and I know that is something that we've kicked around the idea of addressing in core for a long time. And I don't know if Seth, you might already have a PR open for it, or
so the plist table that is in osquery is fundamentally broken. And I think it's just buggy. I don't think this is intentional, but fixing it is a little bit beyond me. So I wrote a Collide plist table and we ship it in launcher.
That table is also 5 years old, the plist table at core.
Yeah, so my read on how that table is supposed to work is it's basically flattening out nested data.
Yeah, at that point, it was like just a key and a value kind of a table, because you don't know what keys you might encounter. Right. So you flatten the array or dictionary out.
Yeah, but it has a bug.
Kind of the simple, okay.
And its bug is that it does not correctly track nested data ordering. So like if you have an array, you can't untangle what if you have an array of hashes, right? So one is A1 and then B2, and then the next one is A2 and B3, and the next one is A. It's easier if we were writing it down. I'm sorry. If you have an array of hashes and each hash has the same keys but slightly different values, the way the plist table in osquery core unwinds that is it doesn't track array position. So it correctly flattens it, but then you end up with A1, A2, A3, and you're like, well, which of these goes where? So you end up, if you actually try and unwind that flattening, you end up trying to say, maybe I have the right value one row up or one row down, which is super ugly and frequently wrong. So the Collide plist table, and I wrote this in a launcher because I can write Go code a lot faster than I can fix C++ code, is it correctly tracks the position in the array so that you can say, oh, instead of having your key isn't A and B. Your key is array position 0/A and array position 1/A, right? So I can go over this better in code, but that's the gist of it.
So can we like take what we've learned from that table and implement that in osquery if someone's able to like make the translation?
We can totally fix it. And you can re-implement it. This is basically just an array unwinding, right? You can fix it any way you want. I don't know that I can fix that. I don't know that maybe there's a boost library. I don't know. I feel like this, like how to flatten deeply nested data into like a flat array is a common problem in sort of my CSE glue interfacing domain, but doesn't have a good name.
We had to do it through Windows events.
Yeah, so almost all the launcher tables now follow this idiom where they are generating complex data, flattening it into an EAV style table, and then returning very ugly looking EAV data, which we can then manipulate in SQL. So this is now a very common pattern for collide tables. I think we don't do a lot of that in core. We tend to favor strong schemas, for good or bad. plist is a little bit of an exception. So if someone's excited to fix the plist table, I'm happy to go over this, not in this meeting, generate a test case, try and show people what's up. I don't know that I can pick that up myself, but
capturing this in an issue might be also helpful to look at a later time with an example if you have one.
Yeah, I can make a trivial broken plist. I'm very pleased with all the things I've done over in launcher land, but you know, they're way over in launcher, so not as exciting to the rest of you.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just reiterate the thing that's been said in the office hours at times is that extensions are a great opportunity to try out new concepts. And I think we've always discussed the idea of trying to bring things that work well in extensions into osquery core itself. I'm not sure that's happened much, but I'd certainly love to see that happen. This seems like a prime example. And another one I can think of recently is Puffy Sid or someone did something that pulls apart executables in an extension, but it didn't really look like there was any reason why it couldn't go in osquery core as well.
I think that was Puffy Sid. He wasn't sure on the process for bringing in a new dependency.
Right. So I mean, I think maybe now is like, you know, we've got a couple of examples of things that maybe seem to work well, and that might be worth trying to bring in.
I'm hemming and hawing a little bit. So speaking, the two things you cited, right? One of them is I built collide plist because I didn't think I could successfully patch osquery core's plist table. And this wasn't like, you know, people would disagree. It was just like, I didn't think I could do that, write that code quickly. So that was much more about like time to implement. And Puffy Sid seemed pretty explicit that he was coming from I don't know if y'all want this dependency, so here's some code. And this was a PR issue or something. And I think we said, oh, this looks great, you should PR it, or maybe someone should help with the dependency or something. I don't remember where that landed. So I think it doesn't feel, we haven't really picked up the like, do we actually want this or not? I don't know, let's test it, right? We've kind of just been like, yeah, let's do what's easy.
Yeah, I'm also going to ask the opposite question. Is there anything we can drop that we know that is no longer used?
Everything's used by someone.
Yeah. Dropping things just make people unhappy.
Yeah, this is true, but it's something that we should try to keep in mind, maybe.
Yeah.
Also, it should also deter us from merging pretty much everything we find cool.
One of the things that we talked about a long time ago was the idea of shipping a very minimal OS query with more in extensions. That's not a thing we've picked up again, but recently I saw Upticks released a like base query, which was like a very minimal OS query with fewer base tables. I haven't looked at that code at all, but I feel like there's some interesting. There's maybe something to explore around. Can we make a build time flag for which tables get built in? Like make that modularized.
Yeah, we had that in the past. We have reintroduced it.
Yeah.
I guess it was lost when we introduced back.
Yeah.
It mostly it's due to the amalgamation thing that has been introduced in the experimental branch, which is again this Python script that takes several generated source CPP files and merges all of them together, and yeah, you have a single big library with all the tables implemented. But then there is this strange thing, which is what you have inside that library is only the part that it's the wrapper that lets you call those tables via SQL, because the actual logic is separate, is built into separate libraries, which are a bit more, again, separated. So yeah, there's a bit of, again, splitting, merging again, and also there are some tables or simply CPP files that implement multiple tables instead of being one file, one table. If we go towards that objective, that final state, then we can associate one flag, one table, because then we can say, okay, this specific file represents that specific table, and we can remove it from the compilation.
I think it was a feature, however, the fact that even the tables you disable are somehow present. They will not return anything, but they will also not break your select statements.
Well, yeah, the problem though is that, yeah, maybe I have to see. Dependencies, how they are expressed right now, must be shuffled around, because that big amalgamation library carries with it a ton of dependencies, which if it's only a wrapper and if it's only for SQL, really shouldn't. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I mean, that's how it was working before with bug. So I mean, I know it was working, not sure how. Sorry, my cat is banging on the furniture.
No, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I'm wondering what was the result of those queries, because if it's only that table has to be there with those specific columns, I think we can probably try to do something a little more lighter, and that just creates fake tables with with the columns specified in the schema. Yeah.
There's so much noise here today. Yeah, so not really sure how base query works. I would be in favor of splitting things. I guess the question is whether it is acceptable to move away from the single file model we are using right now.
I don't think we should move away from it. I think that's a bigger thing, but I think having a build time option would be interesting, because that would let some of the vendors who want to disable things. I recently noticed Cisco basically maintains a fork entirely to disable the carver.
Yeah, I see.
So I mean, maybe they always want to maintain their own fork, but I don't know. I'm like, Cisco seems to maintain a fork just to disable the carver. Optics is shipping a minimal one with like fewer tables. I think just to bootstrap their extensions, maybe in a container or something. I don't know what their needs are. And it's a thing that I feel like we've talked about intermittently for a while. So it feels interesting to be able to say, like, I don't know, build without this table, or build with no tables, and see where we evolve from there. Like, I don't know that I want the build to kick out a bunch of extensions that you could load. That feels like premature work, but it seems reasonable to make it easier for people to build without core tables, or without tables or something.
Yeah, I think we can easily try to reach what we had before, the experimental refactor, and use that as a starting point.
Just to add, I mean, right now, what we have done, we already have done this for a couple of things, which was mainly kind of a quick fix, which one is for BPF and the other are for any AWS table. And how it works, though, is that it really removes any presence of those tables from osquery. So yeah, it wouldn't maintain the fact that you can still query them. But again, it was necessary for OSS fuzz reasons, so not for any user reason. So I mean, what I mean is that for some of those tables, we could start doing that and have them totally disappear. And by the way, I recall I have seen briefly the repository, the uptake repository. What they do, they remove completely the tables. So they use a similar approach to what we have done with AWS and BPF tables.
I think I'd rather, if we did this, I would rather remove the tables and have SQL queries break than like leave weird stub tables that return no data. Like I kind of want to support the idea that no, you built osquery without those tables. Those tables are gone. And I feel like it's kind of interesting because I could even imagine being able to say like, okay, here is like the minimal set of tables. I know there are a couple that osquery needs internally. Here's the normal set of tables, and then maybe here's like an experimental set of tables where like we build all the things that we wouldn't normally build. So I don't know if we would do that, but that would maybe also give vendors an easy way to like define their own table build file or so. I don't know, some kind of CMake file that they could drop in. And
yeah, there's also another detail there, which is why I was thinking that again, starting from doing things the right way from the start might be better, because it depends on how many tables we want to support the disabling, because the current solution is manually adding several options and manually checking where they are linked, and then they are remove them or group them in a way that you can remove them, etc., etc. Obviously, the good solution, the correct solution, is longer to be implemented. It takes more to be implemented, but ideally, you would have write part of CMake that handles adding those libraries. So you have a generic function that says add table, so that then you can just say you can just avoid adding that table. And currently, there isn't this these helpers or structures in CMake, and yeah, it would need some reordering or factoring so that tables are handled in a more generic way, like so that you can have a list of them, and then given that list, you can dynamically generate options, etc., etc.
I don't know if these are options or just like a config file that could be parsed, or I don't know. I'll leave that to you CMake people. And I don't think this is super urgent, so I don't know. It's been on our nice to have list for a while. Okay, well, we're about 15 minutes past. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything else. If not, thank you all. Lots of new conversation and some additional faces. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.